This is episode number 181. Today, we're featuring artist Jill Carver.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Well, thank you, Jim Kipping, my announcer. What a great announcer he is. Give him a round of applause. Welcome, everybody, to the PleinAir Podcast. This has been an absolutely insane time. We are all getting ready for PleinAir Live, which is just around the corner any minute now. It starts officially on July 15th, and the Beginner's Day starts on the 14th. And the world is signing up for this thing. Everybody who's part of the PleinAir world is signing up, and you don't want to miss it. The lineup is stellar. You've got to go to pleinairlive.com just to check it out. It is incredible. It's a virtual event on your computer, and it's filled with amazing top-level artists for 4 solid days and the Beginner Day on the 14th. And it's making PleinAir history. And I want to invite you, no matter what level you are, no matter where you're listening in the world, you want to be part of this. If you want to be part of the PleinAir movement worldwide, this is for you. And of course, if you want to improve as a painter, it's for you too. So you will not regret it. It will be amazing. And of course, our PleinAir convention this August in Santa Fe has been canceled. So this is the best alternative, the best thing to do for PleinAir all year. And it's going to be awesome. Go to pleinairlive.com. Coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering your art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with the amazing Jill Carver. This is her second time on the PleinAir Podcast. Jill Carver, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for having me back.
Well, it's been a while. When we were offline, we were trying to figure out how long it's been. I think you were one of the first people I did on the podcast when I first started doing it, but it's time for revisiting things because I'm sure you've learned a lot since then.
Well, let's hope so. I know our last podcast predates my last Skype account. I had to start all over again, so I think we're probably talking at least 5 years.
Well, I wouldn't have believed it if you'd said I'd been doing it that long, but it's very possible. So, well, anyway, welcome. I'm glad you're back. I wanted to kind of touch base with you, get an update with you, and find out what you've been doing, what's been happening in your life and your career. When we had last spoken on the podcast, you had, I think, fairly freshly moved back to Colorado you were living part-time in Austin. What's happening with that now? Are you still there?
Correct. We are still here full-time, and we've had a cabin here since 2008 and have been full-time for the last 3.5 years, I guess. So what's exciting for me in that meantime is that we managed to secure the purchase of the empty lots next door and built a studio there. So I finally got out of the utility room with the washing machine and dryer.
Well, that's kind of nice. And so what's that like, planning and building a studio? I'd love to hear what you did. Because I'm always curious about, what makes the ideal studio for people. Did you do something special, for window light, et cetera? Or did you just build a kind of an average building? Tell me about it.
Yes, well, it was a fun process. So we got the empty lots next door, and I think initially I was looking at empty lots that were available all around town. So there's always that scenario of how far do you want to commute to your studio? And because we're nearly at 9,000 feet, snow shoveling and running vehicles in the snow is definitely a factor here. So when we'd been chasing these lots for, I guess, 2 or 3 years, and finally got the owner to concede and come down in price to something realistic. And to me, that was perfect in that I have to shovel a pathway to the studio in the winter, but I don't have to start a car to go anywhere and get to work. So we did, rather than build, I think my first idea was just building a huge workshop, with electric and plumbing, like a big garage. And that wasn't possible according to the land use code, the building code in town. So I had to build it as a house. So it's a house that it had to be livable. So I had to have a kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom. So to make that work as a studio, my living room is big, and my bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom, which is used as my office, are very, very small. So, yes, technically it's a residential house, but I think anyone looking at a house would think it was rather odd when they walked into the living room. And I do have very high and a lot of, I guess they're northeast windows high up. And we worked around, those windows are always problematic anyway, because they're required to have UV filters and thermal ratings to meet building codes. So what we did was up all the thermal ratings on the other windows in offices and basements and bathrooms. And that permitted me to actually just have clear glass on the north light side.
Well, that tip alone was worth the podcast, because
I'm not getting any greenish tinge or anything coming through.
Yeah, that's a valuable tip because I think everybody faces that these days, or certainly most people do. And is there a type of glass that you have to get to make sure that it's not casting any color?
Well, I think a lot of the UV filters and the thermal filters, even though they're not seeking for a certain color, I think they do filter it. The sales rep brought some samples over to the house, and we were just looking at, sunlight shining through them onto white sheets of paper, and it was quite amazing how much it threw it. So they don't intend them to be filters, but whatever coatings they put on for their UV ratings definitely cast a shade of green.
I've even heard stories that just if you get a regular clear glass, that even a regular clear glass has a slight greenish tinge to it because there's something in glass that makes it green. And I've heard that sometimes you have to order a special glass that has absolutely no coloration in it. Is that what you had to do?
I think we probably did. I don't remember the specs, but certainly the rep knew exactly what I was shooting for. I still think, Eric, to be honest, because we're right on the edge of the forest here, that regardless of the glass, here's the interesting thing in Colorado, we're surrounded by trees, so I think I still get a greenish tinge from the amount of spruce trees that are outside. And then the other interesting thing is in Colorado in the summer, the sky is so dark and so blue that actually I have less light in my studio on a sunny day than I do on a cloudy day because the sun is high and the sky is so dark. And I was talking to Michael Lynch, who you were going to honor at the PACE convention there in Denver. He's an architect. I think he's built 4 studios in Colorado. So I chatted to him a lot in the early days, and he had experimented with skylights in Colorado that you obviously have to build for snow load and so on. There's other issues there, but he said be aware that in the summer, you're probably going to feel like it's darker in there than in the winter when it's snowing, and that's been very true.
Interesting. Now, I've heard some artists say that you don't want to go due north, that you want to go 10% either direction, depending on where you are, because the sun, when the sun goes down, if you go 10%, you get an extra hour of daylight or something, even when you're pointing north plus or minus 10%. Have you ever heard that?
Okay. Well, I have heard that northeast studios are great in terms of that morning light. And certainly right now I get some direct sunlight, but I don't tend to be actually painting in that first hour of the day. I tend to be prepping. For me, it wasn't a choice. It was actually a decision that had to work around the huge septic and leach field system that had to go in the yard. So that kind of dictated the orientation of the building right there.
Well,
I do have a west window, which I thought, it's the street side of the building, so it needed something there, though I didn't think I needed a window there in terms of functioning. And oddly enough, you never know till you build it, but oddly enough, that west window in the morning creates beautiful light. So I actually have a second easel station set up there as well. But it doesn't matter how many windows are. I always end up supplementing with artificial light or having to block off light because I have too much coming in. Certainly in the winter when there's snow outside, it's pretty bright when you get sunshine and snow, and you almost get that as a secondary source of light as well as the sun.
Well, congratulations on that, though. That's, I think, every artist's dream is to finally build the studio, and I think it's really cool that you were able to finally get that done. So that's neat. Are you doing a lot of outdoor painting, and do you do it certain times of year, or do you do it year round?
I would say I'm probably spending most of my time in the studio now, and when I do go out, it's for sourcing reference material. That's definitely changed for me since I used to do the competitions, where it's very product orientated in that you're hopefully producing finished frameable pieces there. And then, so once I finished doing those competitions, going out to paint now is just very much about gathering ideas and trying to get accurate color notes. And that often means for me, and I show some of my studies in the PleinAir Live video that I've just filmed, often there's bare canvas left. I'm just going for what I can get. It's the information. If the light changes or circumstances change, I don't have a problem stopping with a half covered canvas now. That information is like gold.
So I'm curious what the impact of COVID has been on your life, and did you find yourself staying home painting more? Did it impact you in a positive or negative way? This is something that we're all kind of dealing with and trying to figure out, what's next. How did it impact you?
Well, I think, I'm still sifting through. I think the first 2 weeks, like a lot of people, was trying to absorb what was going on and how extensive it was. And, the first 2 to 3 weeks were not painting, but kind of being glued to my phone because the updates seemed to be hourly. And that was a really, stressful time making that adjustment. I then got, a great urge that, well, if the world as we know it is reaching an end of a chapter, then, I've got a duty to do the work that I've always dreamt of doing. And so that was a real motivator for me. I've enjoyed some deadlines disappearing from the calendar. I think that's been a positive. I would say the biggest negative for me has been the loss of the experience of both teaching and interacting with other artists. I think I've really come to appreciate how precious, those friendships and relationships are. And, that for me was the huge motivation in doing, PleinAir Live, was to reach out and reconnect, because whether they're peers or students, I think that back and forth dialogue of, challenging each other, inspiring each other, educating each other is a really key component of who we are. And I would say that's been the absolute biggest void as a result of the lockdown.
Well, I feel the same way. I can't wait to get out. I can get out and paint, of course, and so can you, but the idea of being around other people and interacting with other people, it's part of who we are. And I think that, I agree. That's one of the reasons I did PleinAir Live, is because I felt like probably the convention would be canceled. We didn't know for sure, and we were going forward as if it was going to go forward, but we also knew that it was a very high likelihood. And thank goodness we did it and got it set up when we did, because having to cancel was a bad day.
Yes, I don't envy your position at all. PleinAir Painters of America, we had our workshop scheduled for Taos end of September, and so I was keeping an eye on the state health orders and the COVID case numbers and hospitalizations, the last month. And I don't know if you had read the state health orders, but the maximum gathering of people in any kind of gathering, indoor or outdoor, in New Mexico was 5. And okay, between now and September, we're not going to get to a point where we can hold our workshop. Highly unlikely.
Yeah, well, we were getting a lot of misinformation.
A lot more employees involved, and I feel for you.
Well, the good news is we've got a nice alternative, and that works out. So while we're talking about that, tell us a little bit about what you're going to do. You're always a little bit playful and experimental, and everybody loves to watch what you do, because it's never the same twice in a row. What are you working on? What are you going to do for PleinAir Live?
Well, I'm doing one of my presentations. When I teach, I find that demos serve a certain purpose, but my students are really, really thirsty for theory, for principles. And ever since I did the presentation at PACE in San Diego, I kind of realized the power of visual slideshows, PowerPoint presentations, of introducing, rather than just talk about my method or process, to actually introduce how I use certain principles in my work. And I think a lot of it, I'm certainly self-taught and have learned through, painting for myself, but also taking workshops. And I think a lot of people out there in that same boat right now, they're kind of experienced painters, but they're playing catch up on the academic theory side of things. So I put together a presentation in this video, and it's set in my studio, obviously, and I'm using my own work, but also other visuals incorporated in, thanks to your awesome technical crew. And so I'm talking about 4 principles, 1 motif, 2 no-tan, 3 the separation of light and shadow, which was inspired by something I read in a book on Harvey Dunn's teaching, and 4 kind of the freedom in limitation. Part 1, limiting your palette, and part 2, limiting the number of values that you use. So it's almost like the core of one of the workshop scenarios that I do, where for each day of the week I introduce one theory, one principle that we all focus on. And then by the end of the week, students can realize, that they can layer those principles or in certain situations know which ones to choose to help them create a better painting.
What amazes me, I've been around you and other painters for a lot of years, and every time I turn around, I still find new principles that I never knew. I thought I knew it all. I thought I'd heard it all. And then, you turn around and somebody's got something that blows you away, that makes a huge difference in the way that you paint. So I'll be really anxious to see this, and just for my own painting, not just everybody else's. It'll be nice to do that. I remember talking to an artist one time, and it was a fairly accomplished artist, and no names, of course. And this artist said, I painted for a lot of years, and I had my work in galleries, but nobody ever taught me about values. And then all of a sudden I went to a workshop, and the workshop talked about values, and this artist said, I was doing it, but I didn't know I was doing it. And once I learned it, my work became better. And this was somebody who had been painting for 20 years. It's amazing how sometimes we just miss things.
Sure. And I think, with the values, we're all taught to, how do we see them, and then how do we mix an accurate color note to match that value that we perceive. Because certainly when I'm teaching, if I set the students a grayscale exercise, their ability to mix the right value of gray is very high. And when it comes to mixing color of that value, that's when everyone struggles. And, we're taught to see the infinite variety of values that are out there, and we strive to figure out a way of mixing those colors to those values. But if you start analyzing really good paintings and running them through a grayscale program or software on Photoshop or Photos, you'll realize that actually they manipulated, there might have been, say, 50 out there in reality, and they manipulated those 50 into just 3 or 4 and came up, with this very, very solid design based on that. And they shifted all those values so that they would all belong and be coherent. And there's a lot of people teaching that these days, but I would say certainly when I started taking workshops maybe 10 years ago, it was all about getting the right value, but it wasn't about organizing and manipulating them all into just 3 or 4. And that in itself, oh my gosh, in my studio paintings, as soon as I started doing that initial block-in with a very, very limited number of values, you just realize how much stronger the painting is.
So do you do a big block in big shapes, I assume, in 3 or 4 values, and then will you add some other values on top of that, highlights of the sun hitting a rock or something, or will you try to stay within those 3 or 4 all the time?
I would say up to between 90 and 95%, I will try and stay within those values all the time. And it may only be, that final session of tweaking when you're tuning a piece into a frame that I might stray with a few accents. But generally speaking, you really only need 3 or 4 values. Sometimes you need 5, depending on the environment. But that is enough. And then what you do is you let hue do the rest of the work. So within a value plane, if you want something to recede, we're all taught that lights get darker and darks get lighter as you recede towards the distant horizon. Well, instead of having a value shift, if you simply had a hue shift, i.e. a temperature shift, that can do the work. And so what's happening is you're not overloading the painting with this infinite variety of value shifts, this infinite variety of hue shifts all at the same time, which tends to make them kind of implode with too much information.
I think this is revolutionary. It sounds simple, but it's not very many people
it's really
talking
not.
about
It's really old school.
I'm sure it probably is, but it's old school being revisited because the one thing that for me was mind-boggling was when I finally learned how to make everything about big shapes, because I would go into too much detail and then nothing read well, and I was studying with an artist, and he said, everything's too busy. Just make it 5 or 6 big shapes and make them all different. And so what you're basically doing is you're taking that to the next level, because it's 5 or 6 big shapes and it's 3 or 4 values. And so it really simplifies the process, and it really takes a lot of pressure off. I'm sure it's harder to accomplish.
And the big shapes, we tend to lose those because we are stacking them with too much information. So, a very straightforward and often used way, let's think about a foreground plane that simply acts as a lead-in, as a supporting actor to the main action in the background. Well, your foreground plane, let's think of it as, maybe pink sandy soil with some green tufts of grass, with some yellow ochre tufts of grass. In reality, all those three elements might be different values. But if you say, okay, well, I'm going to tell the viewer what's there, but instead of having three different values, I'm going to mix a yellow ochre, a pink, and a green, all of the same value. It sits right in there, and that foreground retains the big shape as a result.
So, okay, so you're going to talk about the big shapes. What else are you going to talk about? You mentioned them, but I want to drill down on a couple others.
Well, the first one, which sounds so simple, actually, is Motif, which for me is it's as simple or as sophisticated as you want it to be. It sounds really simple. I think it's really hard to hang on to. So by Motif, I mean something a little broader than focal point. Motif for me is the idea behind the painting. And you have to be really kind of analytical with your own thoughts. If you're driving down the road and you're looking for a place to paint, we all know that moment. We recognize it when your heart skips a beat and you hit the brakes and you do a U-turn. And so rather than say, well, it was a pretty scene, actually ask yourself what it was that made it pretty or stunning. And I suggest in this PleinAir Live talk a variety of possible motifs. It might have been a great object that you saw, like a derelict barn. It might have been a wonderful shaped cottonwood tree. It might have been a stunning arrangement of light and shadow. And I suggest that that you write that down and stick to what was the real core component of inspiration, because that a painting with a singular idea behind it, a singular objective, as it were, is going to be a stronger piece. Once you get into it, if you give all those other elements equal balance and equal weight of information, and you end up with what I call scenery painting. And there's nothing wrong with scenery painting. I just think great paintings have a singular purpose behind them.
So you're going to help us understand great paintings. So do you eat dessert first? In other words, when you go out and you find something that really turns you on, maybe it's that motif of that old barn or the side of that old barn, do you try to implement that part, the thing you're most excited about first, or do you kind of save that for kind of getting the whole thing laid in first and then going for that?
Well, it to me, whatever thing is that really excited me, the motif is the foundation on which everything else is based. So your design, your division and placement within the canvas is built around that. Where you put the most detail is built around that. Where you put the most color is built around that. I show an example in the aspen trees of a sunrise in Rico, and the sunrise was so subtle. It was one of those beautiful, pink, rosy dawns amidst black blue clouds and mountains. But in the foreground, I had a whole forest of young aspen trees, the young aspen tree grove, and we all know how detailed they can be. So my point is, I wanted the painting to really be about that sunrise sky, and the aspens I painted in really, really flat, with not a lot of variety at all. I didn't even, suggest the kind of black scarring with the white reflective bark. I just painted them as a tree mass, essentially, just a foreground pattern. Does that make sense? So the one idea, the one motif has to triumph over everything else.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me, and it's a hard thing to accomplish until you get yourself trained to do it. Because, I oftentimes will look at a scene like that, and I'll say, "Well, I really love that sunrise, but I really love those aspens." And really, the only way to accomplish that is to do two paintings, right? Do one of the sunrise and do another of the aspens,
Absolutely.
because otherwise, neither one are going to look. They're not going to stand out.
Right. And I also share in the video a current studio painting that I have on the go where I had two elements competing, and it was a scene by the Animas River down in Durango, and it is a fall scene, so there's a lot of high chroma color. But really, the very, very first thing that made me stop as I was hiking down that trail with my paint kit was the shape of that main tree. And I got in a bit of a pickle once I got into the painting because I got so excited about that tree. I started loading it up with information, both form information and hue shift information. And I stood back and the painting didn't work. And the whole point of that painting was that it was full of triangular and parallelogram shapes. So in my studio, I tend to write on a big sheet of paper by my easel what my motif for that piece is. And it said shape first, color second. And it just helped me stay on track. And as soon as I had kind of removed some of that information and restated the beautiful shape of that tree, it started coming back together again. It sounds such a simple concept, but I think we all recognize the problem when we hear someone talk about it.
One of the big problems I see is that we get so close to things and we get so invested in what we've done. I oftentimes tell a story about how I was doing this winter scene, and my wife walked into the studio and she said, "Eric, the pine trees are perfect. The snow on the branches is perfect. Don't touch that." And so I kept painting and painting and painting, and I was trying not to touch it. And then finally I realized it was messing up my focal point. So I just blurred it all out and started over, and everything worked. But we get tied into it. The other thing I find is that we can't see what we need to see. Do you ever, contact a buddy and say, something's wrong with this, I can't tell what it is? Or have you trained yourself to be able to really understand what's going on?
Well, I definitely have buddies that I can send images to, and that's great because a fresh pair of eyes will often, focus in on what's at fault really quickly. I also find that certainly in the studio, I use my phone a lot as a tool, so I'll be taking snapshots as I progress. And then at the end of the day, I'll just look at them as tiny little thumbnails on my screen. And you can often, if you ask yourself, you see this, scenario of your painting progress throughout the day. And maybe at 1 o'clock, it looked a lot better than it looked at 5 o'clock. And for some reason, there's something about the thumbnail, it's reducing and simplifying that will reveal where you went wrong. And often it is loading, adding too much information because you just get in that place of doing that. Using a mirror and flipping it, turning the painting upside down on the easel first and then looking at it in a mirror so that it's both upside down and flipped will also often reveal what's going wrong with it.
Well, so you're going to reveal some of these tricks. I would imagine having that no-tan, you talked about, you're going to talk about creating the right kind of no-tans as well, but having that as a guide, if the temptation, especially if we're painting outdoors in nature, the temptation is to keep getting seduced by other things that we see or a change of the light or something. So do you pretty much stay glued to what is in your no-tan, or, if you see the light change and you like it better, will you make that change or do a new no-tan? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, when I'm outside, I don't put that pressure on myself to complete a painting. So if I am 30 minutes into one and the light changes and there is something else that's really exciting me, I will always have extra canvases and I'll put that first one to one side and just start on something else. I do think there is this process as you're learning to paint or progress where it's important that you can paint what is out there. And then I think, the balance of the studio is so important because chasing and painting what is out there doesn't necessarily make the best strong painting that you can make of that scene. So it's a progress, isn't it? You learn to paint what is there, and then you learn how you might manipulate or edit what is there in order to make a good painting. For me, that's the relationship. And I think, holding that balance between plein air work and studio work, that's why it's so vital, because the intent between the two is so different.
I'm curious about something I've been thinking about since the last podcast, and I don't think I asked you this question then, but you had a background, I believe, as a conservationist or a restorer at one of the museums in England. Is that right?
I was a research assistant.
A research
at the
assistant.
National Portrait Gallery.
Okay, so you were spending your life around paintings and researching paintings and looking at paintings. I would assume that really helped you, but did it in any way hurt you? Did it kind of formulate an opinion about this is how things are done, and you had to break out of that? What was the impact of that background?
Well, I think just looking at artwork every day, it builds up what I can only describe as a visual acuity. Some people are really good at music, some people are good at languages. I was always very, very good at observing things. So even like as a kid, when you have those little spot the difference picture quiz books, I could tune in immediately and figure out what was the difference between the two, even if it was minute detail. So I think, the practice of looking at paintings every day, trying to figure out if you were trying to build a provenance on a piece, looking at photographs in the 50s and 60s to see if it was the same painting or to see if it was a different version or copy of. You're using your eyes all the time. And like with any tool, the more you use it, the better honed it becomes. So that was definitely a factor. I don't think I was looking at such a range of styles. I don't think it really informed me in terms of, stylistic choices or anything like that. I think it was just much more, using your eyes every day is definitely of an advantage. I mean, we had some pretty ugly portraits in terms of judging them as artwork, but because it was a National Portrait Gallery, if there was only one portrait of this very eminent sitter in existence worldwide, even if it was done by an amateur, it was still considered historically important. So I saw the whole range, of abilities.
So you raised another question when you were saying that, and this is a debate among some artists, and that is style something that just falls in your lap after, you just keep painting and it develops, or is style intentional in terms of, I get this question all the time from artists, how do I develop my style? So I have an opinion, but I'd love to hear yours.
Well, I do talk about this in the video too, because I get students ask that, how do I find my own voice? Well, some of these principles that I talk about, there are so many choices to be made, and none of them are more correct than others. But, I know as a kid when I was looking at, art magazines, and you would see those, 1 to 12 step photographs of how I completed this painting, that I would always respond in terms of my excitement and my preference level to number 7 out of 12. There was something more exciting about it being less rendered. leaving something to the imagination. And so I say to my students, don't get too self-conscious about styles because there are so many choices that you make. Let's just take limiting values. Which 3 or 4 values you choose depends on your own personal reaction to that scene. It depends on what motif from that same scene that you choose to emphasize, and you can line up 20 artists at one place and they will all tell you that a different element was the most appealing to them. Where you choose to place those 3 values on the 1 to 10 value scale is, it's based on reality, but it's also your choice whether you choose to manipulate them. What limited palette are you going to choose for it? I mean, there's so much fun to be had in this process of producing a painting that there's an infinite number of choices to be made along the way. And that's what, to me, it's the infinite number of choices and what you choose as an individual that creates this own map for that particular piece, that end result.
So are you saying you create a different palette depending on what you're painting, or it's just a matter of you obviously have some standard colors you use, it's just a matter of putting out what you're going to use?
Yeah, I have a standard set of colors, but I have started experimenting with limiting the palette on certain pieces in a way to kind of rein myself in, but also as an exploration of what different pigments can do. And for me, that's very much, that's where the studio comes into play in terms of setting that up. Whether, the straightforward one would be, red, blue, and yellow are the primaries, but what happens if you take out your cad yellow as your yellow and put in yellow ochre instead? What happens if your blue becomes a phthalo blue? That's a lot of fun stuff to be had in the studio. When I go outside to paint, I pretty much have a standard palette because I really am trying to chase what's there. I'm trying to learn what's there. I'm trying to capture what's there in terms of pure color notes. So I will use a standard palette for that.
Well, outstanding. Well, Jill, this has been pretty exciting. I think that your talk is going to be fabulous, and I'm looking forward to hearing you on Plein Air Live. And you have some maybe a couple of final thoughts for people who maybe are trying to learn to paint or trying to get themselves to the next level, because we oftentimes get stuck.
I would say, and I suggest that, in the video, is focus on one thing at a time and work on that for a while. There's no fast track. And I think if you can, and it can be very overwhelming. So if you start deconstructing the whole process into bite-sized chunks, it's been called chunking in the past. It's very useful. I use the analogy to golf all the time, and I don't play golf, but it's a useful one in the, in golf, to have a good game on any given day, both your putting game and your driving game have to be on. And they're both very different skills. And I think painting is very much the same way. Drawing is fundamental to everything. If you can't draw, the painting's not going to be great. So practice drawing without a doubt if you're relatively new to painting. And I would just say, pick one topic, pick one principle, and work on it for several months. It's like a juggling act. There's so many facets to the skill of painting that break it down and concentrate on one facet at a time.
So for instance, concentrating on skies or trees or water, is that kind of what you mean?
Not so much objects, but concentrating, improving your drawing, improving your design, beyond maybe, getting caught up in just placing your focal point on the third, really explore different design structures that might be out there, work on limiting your palette, work on, I think a lot of us tend to go for, we get comfortable with certain types of compositions. Maybe do big vistas, or maybe do some intimate scenes, but concentrate on one thing at a time. No-tan is a great one. The exercises I set in workshops, both on no-tan and then on other things such as 3 or 4 values max. I've had students walk away and just do that for 6 months and forget about color for 6 months, and their work has just exploded. I mean, you can just tell, the more you simplify it, the more sophisticated within that simple component you'll get quicker, I think.
Well, and it sounds to me like your message today has a lot to do with simplification. We're simplifying shapes, we're simplifying values. You're now simplifying your palette, and it seems to me I know I've spent my life overcomplicating everything. It seems to me that you're really pushing things in the right direction in terms of making paintings stronger by making them simpler.
Right. And I think of it, what I really shoot for in my classes is the idea that you deconstruct the landscape into all these different elements, whether it be 4 or 5 big shapes, whether it be 3 or 4 values, whether it be a limited number of hues. You deconstruct that landscape in order to understand how the larger thing is made up of the smaller things. And then once you've got it deconstructed into these different components, you as an artist can choose which ones are more important and essential to you, and you can disregard others. I have some folks say, "My gosh, you think so much, and you're so analytical, and paintings should be free and subconscious." But it's really important that you can analyze it and deconstruct it, and then the fun is in reconstructing it, just selecting some of those elements. My new favorite phrase is, "I'm not shooting for paralysis by analysis by any means." Deconstructing it into very clear-cut different elements. It's like looking at it through a different range of filters, perhaps, will help you understand how something is made. And I think that's where that's where my analytical mind comes into play.
Well, when you look at your painting, you would never know you have an analytical mind, because your paintings have this sense of freedom, this sense of spontaneity. They feel high energy. They don't look like somebody who would be thinking through all of this process. And so really it's working to your benefit. Whatever it is, whatever is bringing you that magic, it's working.
Well, thank you.
Well, Jill, thank you so much. I'm excited about seeing you on PleinAir Live. I know a lot of people are excited about it. I'm honored that you would do it, and I hope that we get a chance to learn from you in person a little bit more in the future. Hopefully we'll be able to have a PleinAir convention again, and you'll be able to start doing workshops again. And so, where can people learn about your artwork and look at your artwork?
So my website is jillcarver.com, and then I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. But essentially, I go to my website first, jillcarver.com, and there is a newsletter facility on there that people can sign up to get, the first snippets of workshops or shows that are going to go on the calendar.
Excellent.
But Eric, I've been thrilled to do this. I hope the end result is great, and I'm really looking forward to the questions and answers session next week.
Yeah, well, we're going to have you on live, and so it's pretty exciting. So again, Jill, thank you so much for being on the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, thanks again to Jill Carver, and I cannot wait to see her demonstrate these techniques on PleinAir Live. Be sure to get signed up to see Jill and everybody else. One price includes everybody. Go to PleinAir Live right now. Go to PleinAirLive.com. Are you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
All right. In the Marketing Minute, I answer your questions, and you can email your questions to me, eric@artmarketing.com. I'd like to know your first name and where you're from, and if you want to use a last name, that's good too. Some of you want to remain anonymous, it's okay, but I like to have names. Here's a question from Robert in Boise, Idaho, who says, I've consistently emailed images to many galleries, and their unhesitant reply, that's a good word, unhesitant, is that my work is beautiful, lovely, but not interested in the style. What should I do? Well, first off, nobody's going to tell you if your work is awful. Nobody wants to hurt your feelings, and if they don't like it or they feel it's not living up to par, they're never going to tell you that. There's no reason for them to do so. They don't want to hurt you. And so oftentimes they just say it's not a fit, they're not interested in your style or whatever. Robert, no offense, but you are making the ultimate blunder. Have you not been listening to the podcast? Have you not been listening to all the discussions about getting into galleries? Maybe not. Anyway, I'm not trying to scold you. Galleries typically do not want random artist submissions. They get literally thousands of them. It's annoying to them. It takes their time. Most of them are bad. Even if they're good, they just, they've got what they want and they're going to seek what they want. And so don't necessarily solicit them. That's the big #1 mistake. Do not go and visit galleries and ask them to look at your work. Do not send them emails. Do not send them packages in the mail. They do not want that. And there are a lot of different issues here, but this is not the way to get into a gallery, and you don't want to annoy them. And of course, they probably won't remember you anyway because they get so many, but sending things to them is not their style. So start by doing your homework. Have you looked at their website to see what kind of work do they sell? If you're sending an abstract gallery a bunch of realism or vice versa, and you don't fit, you're wasting their time. So know your gallery before you do that. Furthermore, like I said, solicitation is the mistake. You don't want to do that. The odds are stacked against you when you do that. So go back and listen to the podcast I did with Jane Bellmeyer recently. She talks about very specifically how she selects artists, and she goes after artists who are advertising and promoting themselves, and she's watching them and seeing how they promote themselves. They watch their work and see how it develops. In other words, you've already got to be marketing yourself before you're going to get pulled in, and you're thinking, well, I don't need a gallery then. Well, sure you do. You need all the help you can get. We all do. So be patient and learn about marketing. Read my book, watch my videos, watch the YouTube videos I put out there at Streamline Art Video, and just remember that this is a process. You want to get invited in. You want to make sure that you look for ways to get invited in, and I've got a whole bunch of strategies on that. The next question comes from Katrina Gorman in San Antonio, Texas. Katrina sent us a couple of questions lately. Thank you, Katrina. This is a commission request question. Our cold calling, by the way, means, contacting someone who doesn't know who you are, they're not aware of you, they're not interested. Cold calling, right? Warm calling would be somebody who's interested in you. But our cold calling and emailing businesses to make them aware of your artwork effective, to let them know you are open for commissioned work, or making a letter to send to them directly. I remember this in Art Marketing Boot Camp, but I didn't really see which way would be better to use. Well, Katrina, I just did a long video on YouTube. I've been doing every day. I've been going online at noon on social media, Facebook Live, Instagram, and YouTube, and I have been doing videos on art marketing. And depending on when you're listening to this, I might still be doing them. Check them out. But I just did one on how to get commissions, and it's on YouTube. I know because it's fresh in my mind. I just did it a couple of days ago, but it's worth finding it at Streamline Art Video on YouTube. The commission marketing is like all marketing. It requires a strategy, a target, a plan, and artists who do commissions can make it a very high percentage of their income and make a lot of money on commissions if you do it right. Now, all marketing is not a single item, like a single letter or a single email. Usually, like all things, it takes repetition. And so you've got to have repetition, but first you need to know your customer, do your research. Find out about these businesses if you're going after businesses. What do they have in their offices or their buildings or their lobbies? What kind of art? Do they have art? Do you think they're opening up new locations? Look for things that you think will be a fit so you don't waste a lot of time on mail or email or otherwise. Also, commissions are a really great way to upsell people, to leverage existing customers into more purchases, because everybody's got a special occasion or an event. You know, you might be doing a house portrait or a portrait of somebody or something for a business. You just never know. But if you're going to cold call, make sure you eliminate your waste by doing your homework. Find out about commissions also from various city and government associations. They're doing commissions all the time. But look for the people you know, the people you have contact with. That's going to give you your very, very best opportunity for selling commissions.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Well, a reminder that the most important event in the plein air world this year in 2020 is going to be July 15 through 18. If you're listening to this before that date, get right to pleinairlive.com. Sign up. You don't want to miss it. It is about 1/10 the cost of going to the Plein Air convention, and you get a lot of that same experience from top instructors in the world. It's pleinairlive.com. Also, if you've not seen my blog about life and other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can see it or hear about it at coffeewitheric.com. All right, coffeewitheric.com. Well, this is always fun. I love doing the Plein Air Podcast, and I will see you sometime soon, like next week. I'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, spread the Plein Air Podcast to others, and it's a big world out there. Make sure you go and paint
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.